What a wonderful, wonderful day. This is truly the day that the Lord has made. We are celebrating this morning the wonderful overcoming of the Christ. But before we really get into that part of the resurrection, I'd like to take us back for a moment to Holy Thursday, when the disciples were in the upper room with Jesus celebrating the Passover. It had been a very interesting meal, to say the least. And only in John do you find that Jesus is praying a prayer that is an intercessory prayer, and it has three parts. First, Jesus is praying for himself. And he says, I glorify you, Father, on earth by finishing the work which you gave me to do now. Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory which I had in your presence before the world existed. Now, Jesus prays first for himself because we know that if we are not prayed up, as we sometimes say, we find that things don't go as well as they should, and we really can't pray for others if we are not in a prayerful state ourselves. And so Jesus is praying that he be glorified with the glory that he had with the Father in the beginning, before the world was. So what he is saying is the Christ existed before this manifest world came into being. Jesus was recognizing the Christ as eternal, existing in full consciousness of wholeness before there was a manifest world. And then Jesus prayed for the apostles. And he said, Holy Father, keep them in your name that you have given me, so that they may be one, even as we are one. Jesus was holding the consciousness for the disciples while he was on earth. He had been teaching them very spiritual things. And they had, as a result, been lifted up, just as we are lifted up when we are with people who believe much the same thing we do and who are of a similar consciousness. And we are often drawn to people if we are on a quest and we are spiritually seeking. We gravitate to those people who seem to speak to us. And this is what we do here in this church. He was praying for his disciples so that they be lifted up, so that when he was gone, they would not be tempted to go back to the way they had been before, because the world is very enticing. And so this is why he was praying for them. He wanted them to realize their oneness with God as well, and to continue to realize it. Many of us here that are in this gathering are here as much as anything to help keep the consciousness of this church high. There are many of you here doing that this morning. And as a result of that, no matter what seems to come along, we are able to overcome it because we keep our consciousness high. And then Jesus prays for us. He asks that we too be able to recognize our oneness with the Father and with him. And he says, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. That you have sent me. Jesus is speaking at this time from the Christ of being of himself. And in this prayer, he prays for all of us, that we become aware of our oneness with him and with God. And then after this intercessory prayer, Jesus takes the disciples, and they go to Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane is a beautiful garden where Jesus prayed often, and he called his disciples with him. And as they reached the gate, he asked the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, to accompany him farther into the garden where he would pray. Now, those of you who have taken the 12 powers understand that Peter, James, and John represent certain aspects of ourselves. Those aspects are: Peter represents faith, James represents wisdom, and John represents love. These three. And wouldn't you, if you were going to face a real trial, wouldn't you want those three with you? Wouldn't you want faith, wisdom, and love with you as you face this? And so he is very, very troubled at this time, and he needs these three with him. And he goes to pray. And during this time, the human side of him comes forth. And that human side is very upset and very saddened and very afraid. And he asks that God take away the cup with him from him if possible. And, this was Jesus' human side, and he felt all of those things that we feel when we are reaching a challenge or our own mortality. First, he experiences a fear, and then he experiences watching and waiting and asking for things to be different. Then he comes into a time of surrender, and then from surrender he comes into acceptance. But during this time, he comes to the three and he says to them, "Can you not watch with me for a while?" And he says, "You don't know, but the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Pray that you stay steadfast." And he went back to pray again 2 more times. And as he did that, he came into a place within himself that he was at total peace. And when he was totally at peace, he came out and he found all of the disciples were asleep. Now, I don't know, but it seems to me that carbs and wine are an absolutely perfect recipe for sleep. I think that, I don't think he should have been surprised at all. Back then, times were very, very frightening and very desperate. And remember I remember the school teacher who said to her little group of kids as they were coming into service one day, she said, "Now, do you remember why we stay quiet during church?" And a very bright little girl said, "It's because they're sleeping." Aren't we all asleep to a certain extent? Don't we all need that Spirit of God to awaken us and to bring us back into this moment, to bring us back into why we came here in the first place? I believe that we do. Jesus has a great message and an influence on the world today. I truly believe that we must see the difference in what we believe about Jesus and what we've been taught about Jesus. We must see the difference between the religion about Jesus and the spirituality of Jesus.